Welcome back, students. I'm Professor Martinez, and this is History Talks. Students, I hope you've been having a good time so far within our online world. I hope that it's made sense with the navigation of how we've done things. And out of curiosity, I'm curious to know your guys' experience with online classes. What are the things that you liked about them? And what were the things you don't, if you have had an online class before? Me being an online professor, I'm genuinely curious on the things that students do appreciate and want to avoid within these platforms that we learn from. Thank you so much for sharing. Just out of curiosity, as I'm building my curriculum, I always want to know what is it that the perspective of the students have as they go through the learning process. In this next episode of History Talks, we're going to go ahead and explore two different concepts that really blend together when we talk about the Industrial Revolution. We're going to talk about both the titans of industry and immigration during the Industrial Revolution. For us to truly understand the economic boom and industries that are growing, we truly need to understand a few economic terminology to understand how capitalism and business is done in this time period. Not only are we going to talk about how business is done back in the times of the Industrial Revolution, but we're also going to talk about the workers in which helped these industries thrive and make economic prosperity within these businesses. Let's go ahead and look at our objectives to see what we have in store for today. As you can see, we are still focusing on the industrial age. We're focusing, of course, today on the roots of American industrial superiority, meaning what are the industries that really catapulted our country into the next level of being an economically sound country that imports and exports to the rest of the world. Let's go ahead and do a quick recap on where we are within our history. Following the Civil War, advancements in technology made it possible for industries to grow at a rapid rate. Railroads expanded, introduction of steel, developments of labor laws, inventions of assembly line, the battle over electricity, the invention of flight, development of the telephone, as well as the development of the banking industry, all leading to the start of an economic boom that will result into America holding industrial superiority. But for us to truly understand how we reach this industrial superiority, we really need to understand some terminology to make sense of how business was done in this time period. And that's what we're going to do first before we introduce those titans of industry. Like, for example, the following terms. Please go ahead and document the two terms you see on your screen. This is going to be important information for your later quiz within this module. We're going to be talking about something called free enterprise and also corporations. When we're talking about free enterprise, it's the freedom of private business to organize and operate for profit in a competitive system without interference by government. This means that when it comes to how business can run, there is no regulations, there are no rules, there is no way in which the government is supervising and regulating what is being done within the industrial sector. Meaning people could essentially produce whatever they wanted. It could be healthy for consumers or not. At the end of the day, there was no expectation on the business to ensure the safety of the consumer. When talking about free enterprise, let's give an example of what I mean by unhealthy products. Ever had a toothache? Have you ever considered cocaine toothache drops? Believe it or not, from the image like you saw, this was an advertised product that was given not only to adults, but even children. As it advertises, it instantaneously cures. It also instantaneously gets you addicted to the drug itself, as it is vitally unhealthy for your body. But these are the kind of things we're mentioning. Products that were not screened to test for the safety for the consumer and being put out into the public with no repercussions of what would happen if the situation of someone was to die or injure from that product. There was many different things like this that were happening in which either businesses were unaware or were not expected to change in which would make their product safer. For another example, a lot of children toys back then were made out of lead. Lead is a very toxic material for humans. We produce many lead toys. These toys are getting in the mouths of children. And in this circumstance, there was a lot of children who died needlessly because of either our unawareness or lack of urgency to fix the situation that was at hand. Different things like this were happening often. There was a classic saying of people who were snake oil doctors, people who would promise these remedies and treatments for medical help that later resulted to people just consuming oil, as it really did not do anything besides help out a scam artist at the end. In this time period, such actions in business can happen. In free enterprise times, the private companies are able to do whatever it takes to make profit, and there is no government interference to say otherwise. The next thing we're going to talk about that would also be considered free enterprise is not just about consuming products, but also the practice of business. If you look at my other image, this is going to be the times where we have conversations about child labor, as that was a fundamental part within this time of the Industrial Revolution, as many businesses preferred to hire children as people to work within these factories being created. As you can see from the image, these are not good working conditions, not only for just kids, but adults. As you can see in the image, children who are on these machines that are rapidly moving, who can lead to serious harm, and then also lack of materials of safety and clothing material. There are shoeless children operating quick machinery that could lead to further problems. We're talking about not only consumer products, but of course also working conditions like this. Another term we need to understand. During this Industrial Revolution, corporations become a very large thing. If you don't know what a corporation is, it is a single entity or business which comprises of multiple individuals in different locations to operate the business. It is the next level businesses go within their evolution. Not only do these corporations no longer are tied to an individual who operates it like a mom or pop store, it starts to get legal identification as an actual entity of its own. Meaning that if you were to sue a corporation, you're suing the business, no longer the CEO. As the business has become so large, it has developed its own legal entity that lives past even the CEOs and those who run the business itself. Also, for it to be a corporation, it has to be a vast network of people working and operating for the sake of whatever production of service or product is being done. So this isn't a mom and pop's level. This is the sense of things like Amazon, for example. Amazon is a very large corporation. We understand we understand that Jeff Bezos isn't the man who's truly operating the whole company. Rather, he has a vast network of employees all around the world who are all connected in the same direction of providing a service to their customers. Corporation so large that it has that many people and becomes a legal entity of its own identity. Let's continue. Another thing that was very common in the Industrial Revolution is Monopoly. And no, I'm sorry, it is not the board game that we all imagine. When I'm talking Monopoly, I'm talking about the domination of an industry. When a single company has reached the full power within that industry. They become, if you will, the king of the hill of that industry, whatever it may be. Now, when I'm meaning industries, I'm meaning all these companies that are all associated within the same product or service. So if I was talking about, like, for example, the music industry, I'm talking about all the different music industries that come together to produce something. If I'm talking industries, I'm talking about things like, for example, the entertainment industry. And in the entertainment industry, you have all these different movie studios who are all working at the same thing, which is producing entertainment. This is what I mean by industries. People who are collectively, companies that are collectively companies that are all within the same field of service or product that are competing with one another typically. But in a monopoly, there is no competition. Better yet, it's being excluded by the dominating industry that ensures that it has no competition. Like my image shows, not only do they like no competition, they truly like to be the one supplier in that field where that they're the only one consumers can go to. When a industry, when a company has that amount of power where they become a monopoly, they start to be able to control price. Because there's no competition between this business and that business, there's no need to try to get a better sale or better prices that entice consumers. But when it's a monopoly, there is none of that. You don't have to compete. You can make the price what it will be, and people will have to be okay with it. And they ensure that no one else joins that market, where they're the one that will be the only provider. Now, monopolies are eventually going to stay with the Industrial Revolution and no longer be something that is allowed within our economy. For the most part, I'm curious, do you know of a service that we all use that it only comes from one company? We all have it. There was no choice in which you can buy it from anywhere else. It's all coming from the same company that provides the service to the Pacific. Do you have an idea what that is? Out of curiosity, if you have an answer, I'm curious, put it in right now, and let's see if you're right. Thank you for responding. And did you say PG&E? Because you were right. That is a service we all use. And when you decided you needed electricity in your life, you couldn't go to anywhere else. You couldn't go to Best Buy. You couldn't go to Walmart and get Walmart electricity. We all go to the same utilities provider, which is PG&E. That's in a sense a monopoly. You as a consumer had no choice. You can either have electricity with PG&E or none. You choose. That's what I mean by that domination. It makes it where that business really has power and the consumer doesn't have a lot of choice within it. Keep this in mind when we talk about the titans of industry and the places they dominate within the industries they acquire. Let's move on to the first checkpoint we have on this one. And I want to ask you guys, what is the difference between free enterprise and a monopoly? Just so that we understand the differences of these terminologies, answer this question right now before we continue. Thank you. Now, let's go ahead and move forward, shall we? We're going to go next level with our economic terminology, things we need to understand so we understand how business was done. We're now going to talk about how businesses were able to get to the monopoly level. There are things they have to do as steps to reach this, and there's different ways to do it. Those things are like horizontal integration and vertical integration. Please make sure you document these two terms. Now, talking horizontal integration, our term for this is that it's when a business's primary goal is to acquire a similar company in the same industry. I have two relevant examples for us that we see nowadays in our society that really make sense of this. For example, if we are talking about the entertainment industry, there is a particular company that has acquiring other industries' media and bringing it within theirs. That, of course, is Disney. Disney has been working really hard allocating all of these other similar industry companies, like, for example, Disney owning Marvel, Disney owning Star Wars, Disney owning different news outlets, Disney owning ESPN. Yes, believe it or not, Disney has been rather busy, not just being a cartoon of a mouse, but now taking on a lot more of these other entertainment industries, where now they are the hub for lots of content that once wasn't theirs, but now they have. If we're talking about the entertainment industry, there's been another company that's been making moves. They've even changed their name to evolve to this new stage of them acquiring new companies. That, of course, is now Meta. Meta is just the new name of Facebook. Facebook had to find a way cleverly to stay relevant. How to do so? Well, they bought out any other company that was in the same industry, where now they're the ones who are in charge of it. Did you know that Instagram is owned by Meta? Did you know that Snapchat is owned by Meta? Also, another very popular app that we don't use too often here, but is used globally, called the WhatsApp app. All of these other apps were once companies of their own, but then were bought by Meta and now are in part of that umbrella. The only thing that we see so far is TikTok not being a part of that, but Meta has tried and it did not quite work for them. But if they could, they would. Now, as you can see from my example here of the horizontal integration, this happens in many different industries. It's not just entertainment or streaming or content like that. It's also going to be within refineries and oil companies and things like that. Now, talking vertical integration. Vertical integration is different than horizontal. Vertical integration is when a form of business in which all the stages of production of goods, from getting raw materials, making it, and selling it, are all done by the same business. It's a way for a business to be able to control the way in which to produce something. Sometimes companies, to be able to make a thing, require on other companies to help them make those things, or require certain pieces for that thing to work. For example, your computer that you're on right now. Yes, it's a computer that may be an Apple computer, or maybe even be a HP or PC. But there are certain other companies that put parts in there to make your computer work, like the processing chips. Is your computer running on Intel? Intel is a different company that gives its product that it purchases or creates, which is those chips, that goes within HP computers, relying on each other in that way. Now, vertical integration is when you don't want to rely on people. Rather, you're wanting to be in charge of the whole process yourself, so you don't rely on others. And that would start at any stage within the production of that good. Let's give two examples to help us out with this one. Let's start with Apple. Apple has done a marvelous job being able to do vertical integration. Instead of them relying on an Intel processing chip from a different company or someone else creating their batteries or lens, they make sure all of that is done in-house. They made their own software. They made their own chips. They made their own batteries and camera lens. Everything within an iPhone is created by Apple. They do not rely on other companies, and by doing so, they are able to control the price of production of that good. Another place we can talk about is Netflix. Netflix also has done a very interesting vertical integration. Netflix used to be a place where they would find other companies who have produced content and got permission to have it on their platform. But Netflix wised up. They found out, yes, I could rely on other companies to produce content and then try to make deals to bring it to my platform, or we can make Netflix produce content so we don't rely on those companies to do it for us. Now we have things like Netflix originals, all these other things that are now entertaining, all coming from Netflix and their studios, rather than relying on outside studios to bring in the content all the time. That's the difference between vertical and horizontal. Horizontal focusing on all of the competitors who are already producing that same thing in the same industry, and you acquiring those companies so you're the only one. And vertical is you controlling how something is made from beginning to end. We're not relying on others. If you look at my image here of talking about the meatpacking industry, if you will, you would see that if someone was trying to be in charge of a level of meat industry, they would need to own cattle. They would need to own the ranches. They would also need to run a slaughterhouse. They would also need things to transport all of their meat, things like refrigerated railroad carts or cool warehouses to store it. They would also need to be in charge of a meat packing plant that's going to package this stuff. And then, of course, the delivery of it reaching the actual grocery stores. Another example of vertical integration, making it all happen within your own realm. Let's do a little quick test, shall we? Let's say we are a pencil producing company. We make pencils. And as a business, we've decided to use horizontal integration. What would we need to do to be able to succeed with horizontal integration? What would we need to do to properly apply that term? Go ahead and answer that in this checkpoint right now. And let's see if you have it right. Thank you so much. If you said that we would have to purchase other companies that produce pencils, you are absolutely correct. If we were a pencil company, we would have to buy out the Office Depot pencils. We would have to buy out the Bic pencils and any other pencil company like Papermate to ensure that we are the ones who are dominating within that industry. Well done. But what about vertical integration? Same thing. We're still a pencil producing company and you're doing vertical integration. What would we need to do to pull that off? Really think about a pencil. Think about all that is included in it as a product. And let's see if you're right about this one. Thank you for responding. This one is a little challenging, but if you said that if we were to do vertical integration as a pencil producing company, we would need to be able to buy a lumber mill for the wood that we're using. We would need to buy the lead company for the lead that is in it. We would also need to own an aluminum factory to be able to produce the aluminum around the rubber. And of course, rubber to have the rubber eraser. All of that is the things we would need to acquire to be able to create a one single pencil product. Owning all of these different resources and the refinery and factories that process them so that it's all controlled by us, what it takes to make that very pencil. Thank you. Now, I talk about this because the titans of industry, those first millionaires and billionaires I mentioned, use these strategies and able to be in that dominating position. Like, for example, let's talk about a man named John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller, if you don't know, is a well-known industrialist man. He is one of those titans of industry who had so much power that he even was able to contend against the US government. How? Well, this one man, after using horizontal and vertical integration, was able to dominate and own 90% of the oil on the North American continent. One man owning 90%. That's power. How did he do it again? Horizontal integration. He reached out to all of his competitors, his rival companies, and ensured one way or another that he was to acquire their companies, either buying it out or other devious methods of business strategies that we will talk about later on, where he made sure to own oil wells, train cars, the retail stores, and all of that money going to one source, which was his company called Standard Oil Company. These are the reasons we talked about these terminologies, so you can understand how these next men I introduce you to were able to acquire the vast amount of wealth they did. So, with that being said, let's introduce them. Let's meet those titans of industry. Now, we will need to know the basics of each of these men, more so the industry they had, and also the way in which they acquired it. For example, this man right here with the mutton chops, his name is Cornelius Vanderbilt, a very strong businessman who dominated within the railroad industry. He did this after his experiences within the transportation in ferries. Ferries being, of course, boat transports. And he did this within Staten Island and Manhattan. Later, he expanded his ventures into the railroad industry, where he became a significant role model within all the railroad tracks that were held within North America. The strength of this man, and especially for us who knows the importance of railroads during this time period, had had the power over the United States economy, as he was the man who was transporting things and transporting those products from one place to another. The next man we've already mentioned, and this is John D. Rockefeller. His industry, like I mentioned before, was oil. And he had intense business tactics to ensure that his horizontal vertical integration and his vertical integration gave him that aggressive competition to ensure control within this area. As many of these men experienced, they're all vastly wealthy over the industries they run. Rockefeller being considered one of the richest men in the modern time, with his estimated net worth being 336 billion in today's dollars. Our next gentleman is going to be another vital titan of industry, and his name was Andrew Carnegie. What makes Andrew Carnegie different is a few different things. One is his upbringing. He's going to be one of these new immigrants who comes to the United States, comes from nothing, starting with humble careers in the beginning. He eventually gained the importance of understanding vital materials that were being used consistently during the Industrial Revolution, especially after his experience within the railroad industries. He realized steel was the product to invest in. He founded the Carnegie Steel Company in 1870 and then became the largest and most profitable steel company in the world. His products were essentially the majority of the materials used within a lot of the larger developments within railroad construction and the skyscrapers now that we're able to build vertically within our areas. The way he was able to make this happen efficiently and with quality is he used the Bessemer process, which was his way in which to bring down the production costs and make the price for this far more affordable and lucrative for himself. Carnegie is also known for his controversy within his business strategies. He also did face criticism for his treatment of workers and the involvement in labor disputes. All right, let's go ahead and move to our next individual. And this guy is also equally important. This is J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan is going to be a prominent American financier and banker who lived from 1837 to 1913. He had a significant role in the development of modern banking industry in the United States. Him having a different background compared to Carnegie came from a wealthy family where he inherited his father's banking business. In his career, he became a prominent and the most powerful banking house within the world with his company called J.P. Morgan Company. Now, his banking company is still around. You may not recognize it though. It's no longer called J.P. Morgan. It's called Chase Bank. Well, if you use Chase Bank, congratulations, you have your money along with JP Morgan's company. His business still has influence even today, as we can see. But he's also going to be known for his major impact within the growth of those other businesses we mentioned, like the steel, railroad, and even electricity industry, as he's the one who will be funding it and consolidating investments in the name of those industries. He was also known for his ability to consolidate and reorganize struggling businesses. Now, our next titan might be familiar because you're seeing his products still on the road even today. We're going to talk about Henry Ford. And like the last name mentions, yes, Ford Automobiles, as Henry Ford is going to be the first man to set off the automobile industry in America. As we understand, the automobile industry is essential within American society, and this man himself is given credit for developing the assembly line technique, which allowed for mass production of vehicles at a fast rate and a lower cost. That lower cost made it ensured that this was not just a product for the wealthy, but is also something that even his workers could purchase, as it was going to be an affordable product for all. His first vehicle was called the Ford Model T, as this is considered the first affordable automobile for the average American, leading to its popularity in car ownership. His innovative production methods and the use of interchangeable parts set a new standard for efficiency and productivity in the manufacturing industry. Such a new product being affordable definitely changed the shape of how we navigate within our society, as it will then have a reaction to later the ways in which we develop our cities with now roads and cars in mind. Now, I want to give you guys a checkpoint here. Out of the men we just mentioned, which industry do you think is the most vital? Answer that question for me before we continue. Thank you so much. Now that we have these big players on the stage within our storytelling of the Industrial Revolution, and now that we understand how business was done in this time period that led to these men's prosperity, we will now transition to those who work for those men and those who work those industries to provide the growth and prosperity they provide. But beforehand, I would love for you to watch this video. Thank you so much for watching that film. Now, before we continue any further, here's our little intermission moment. A moment for you to have a moment to compose yourself before we transition from our Titans of Industry lecture to now focusing on immigration during Industrial Revolution. All right, you ready for the next part? Let's go ahead and get started with that next segment. This unit, we're going to be focusing on something a little bit different on the Industrial Revolution, less on necessarily urbanization, but rather the movement of people that we're seeing with the new development in immigration. We're going to focus on immigration during the Industrial Revolution, specifically from 1880s to the 1910s, seeing a new rush of immigrants coming to Europe and seeing how that intermixes with the new industrial American society. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to learn exactly within this lesson. First off, we are going to compare the new immigrants of the late 1800s to the earlier immigrants, explain the push and pull factors leading to why immigrants are coming to America. Also, we're going to describe the challenges these immigrants face establishing their new lives in America, as well as analyzing how immigrants adapted to American life while contributing to American culture. All of this is going to be under the essential question of how does a nation of immigrants form an identity? This is a peculiar, interesting predicament that American society has itself to be in, rather than the other homogenous nations that exist. How does this nation that promotes the idea of being a nation of immigrants create an identity that would be unified within this nation? That's going to be the question that we're going to answer within this lesson. So let's go ahead and set the background, shall we? Immigration has been a central theme within American history. However, when a foreign-born population of the United States nearly doubled in 1870 and 1900, some Americans feared that the newcomers would damage American culture. Instead, over time, Americans adopted parts of immigrants' culture, while immigrants adopted parts of American culture. The contribution of immigrants combined with the existing culture helped shape the American culture into a diverse and unique whole. This is that predicament I'm mentioning on how does this nation form that identity while also seeing such a rush of different cultures come and occupy this nation as well. That's going to be the focus within this unit. Let's expand on this for a second, shall we? When you reflect on American society, how do you see the way that we've integrated all these different groups of immigrants and cultures?
When you look at it, do you see the melting pot of our society? This idea that our Chinese, Irish, Italian, Mexican, or Russian, or any immigrants had given up elements of their identity to then embrace and accept this new form of American identity? Or do you see it as more of the salad bowl idea, which is that American identity is so much of just like this foundation, and all of these new immigrants, such as Chinese, Irish, Italian, Mexican, or Russian immigrants, or any, come to America as individual units rather than this collective identity? Do we see ourselves as subgroups within a salad bowl as different ingredients, or are we one ingredient as whole, like the melting pot? Think about this question as we continue today and see if you have an idea of where you see America when you look at our society. But let's talk about that immigration, especially specifically from Europe from 1870 to 1910. We're noticing a different trend that's going to lead to a lot of today's conversations. We're going to be talking about this idea of old versus new immigrants, this idea of these two different groups that are coming to United States and come with different elements of ethnic culture and identity. Friends, we're going to see a new rush of European immigration that's going to be coming more from the Southern and Eastern European sections. And we're going to categorize these people as the new immigrants. What makes them different than the old immigrants is what they bring along with them. At this time, they are practicing Catholicism and Judaism, and they are going to be seen as more of the other for the fact of their darker complexion. These people are going to be the new vast trend of flow of immigrants that will come from Europe. And as you can see on the chart, they come in at a large appearance. In 1910, compared to 1900, they nearly double within the influx of immigration that comes in from this time to nearly 725,000 individuals coming through. This is going to make a big deal, especially for those who occupy American society before them, and how they see this new immigrants and how are they to bring them into what they're hoping to form as the American identity. Before we go any further, though, let's make sure that we understand these differences. What are they when it comes to the differences between old immigrants and these new immigrants? What's the difference between these two? Before we continue, go ahead and answer that. Before continuing, go ahead and answer that for me. Thank you so much. Let's continue, shall we? So let's ask the next question, which is, why are they coming? Why are these new immigrants the ones who are starting to rush in at such a great amount of numbers? Well, let's use our push and pull factor that we've done in the past. When we're looking at movement within people, this is a good way of understanding why one would be pushed out of a region and drawn and pulled into another. So let's talk about the push factor. What is happening globally that is impacting these people to want to migrate? Well, for example, in 1800, farmers had difficult times in many parts of the world. We're seeing a great shift of those who are farmers to then leaving for a new profession. Places like in Mexico, Poland, and China, all these places are seeing a lot of land reforms and low prices for crops that are forcing many farmers off of their land due to the mechanized agriculture and, of course, large farmers. This also does result to overpopulation and land shortages and the potato famine, which was infamous within Ireland. In 1840s, China and Eastern Europeans also experienced repeated wars and political revolution. Within the instabilities of other civilizations and societies, others looked to other nations for an idea of finding security. Places like the United States started to become a refuge for certain groups that were starting to feel certain levels of persecution. For example, one of the largest groups to settle in America were Russian and Eastern European Jews at this time. Why? Well, beginning in 1800s, they fled religious persecution and came to the United States to live in safety and hopefully to achieve a better life. In American South, we're seeing also a rush of African American movement from the South to the North. And the explanation for this is simply for the emergence of Jim Crow laws and segregation and the increased lynching that led to Blacks moving up further north. Now, what's pulling them into particular American cities? Well, in addition to the vague hope of opportunity the United States offers, there's a special attraction that comes with the United States, which is the idea that we have plentiful of land and that at this time we do have religious freedom or tolerance, and that there is lots of employment or opportunities here. These are the promises that immigrants hear from across the ocean into Europe, thinking that America will be the next place to be able to put their family roots into. Also, there is certain forms of encouraging immigrants to come into America. Things like the 1862 Homestead Act and the aid from railroad companies made Western farmland inexpensive. So you're going to start to see some industries and companies like the railroad industry that starts to see this new workforce as an opportunity and encourages them to go more into the Western frontier to help establish and create further building structures and railroads. Also, the amount of unskilled labor jobs here were in abundance in the cities, and this led to many factories appealing to immigrants as it would be easy for them to be trained into the unskilled labor that they would have that could be done at low wages. Also, the other enticing thing that's happening within American society, especially within our cities, is this idea of community support. These are going to be different subgroups within a city where different cultures have a dominance in, and these I'll call ethnic enclaves. You totally understand what I mean if I give you some examples. When you look at big cities like San Francisco or New York City, you always notice that there's all these different subgroups. Like there's Little Italy or Chinatown. There's all these like subgroups with subcultures that kind of stay in concentrated forms. That's what I mean by an ethnic enclave. It's a group of a community of foreigners who have created this familiarity to their previous culture within this new American society. This is another reason why you're starting to see immigrants being drawn to America, as they can have both the frontiers of opportunity and culture, but also the safety net of something familiar within these small communities that start to exist within American cities. So what's the journey like? Now that we're starting to see so many immigrants being enticed to come to America, what does it take to get here at this point? Well, there are two different elements to this story, or there's two different experiences to it. And depending who you are gives you different experiences. Let's first talk about those Eastern Europeans or those new immigrants that we're mentioning. These are going to be people that are coming from Europe to America. And in that circumstance, geographically, how would they get here? What would be the place to go? Well, New York City would obviously be the first place to stop, as that would be the Mecca city on the East Coast. To enter, immigrants had to be healthy and show that they had money, skill, and were sponsored to provide for them. This was the checkpoints that immigrants had to go to beforehand, before actually making it onto mainland. They had to be approved. And these checkpoints were islands that were adjacent to the cities. So for New York City, this is going to be Ellis Island. And we're going to talk a lot about that. And when it comes to our for our European immigrants, they had to be first stationed at an immigration outpost, which was Ellis Island. This, of course, was the first stop for the processing center, where immigration officers had to decide who could stay and who had to leave, who were trying to be accepted into America. To be able to be considered, immigrants had to be healthy and show that they had money or a skill, or that they were sponsored by a company to bring them in. Most European immigrants arrived in New York Harbor beginning in 1892 and were processed at New York. There's a statistic I like to share, which is the idea that 40% of Americans can find their family ties going to Ellis Island, as their first ancestors reaching to America had to be approved at that spot. Now, when it comes to the West Coast, the experience is going to be a little bit different, and it's going to be for a different group of people. Now, talking about the East Coast, we're going to see the immigration processing station be right outside of San Francisco, and this is Angel Island. Angel Island was the place where they saw a large influx of Chinese and other immigrants that were crossing the Pacific Ocean. And as they arrived to the San Francisco Bay, they had to first stop at the processing center to also be approved into being accepted into American society. Now, a large number of immigrants that are coming at this time are going to be from 1850s, and a lot of them are being drawn into a lot of the industries that are promoting lots of labor, especially within mines, railroads, farms, and fisheries. These experiences are very different between the East and West Coast. And I actually have these two different primary sources that help try to capture what it must have been like for these immigrants to come to America and to see what is here to be offered to them, something very foreign to what they used to come from. Let's look at these writings from Marriott Tin when she was 13 years old, as she documents her experiences from coming from Belarus to Boston in 1894. Let's go ahead and move now to the West Coast and hear from Li Chu, who was at the age of 18 when he moved from China to San Francisco, California in 1880. As you can see, vastly different experiences from both the East and West Coast. And that simply is those who are coming to America and what is here to be offered to them. Think about these two different experiences that we just heard, and think about what were the similarities and differences between these two. What were the ways that these two both looked at American society and tried to find a way to maneuver through it? Answer this question before we continue. Well done. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and move on, shall we? So, all of these promises don't go without some social issues that come with the influx of immigration. And like I told you, when you look at American society and how we've integrated all these different cultures, do you see it as that melting pot? Or is it really the idea of the salad bowl, which is this idea of all of us being in separate sections of American society, not exactly mixed together, but collectively unique individually? Which one is it that you see? If we're talking melting pot, it's the idea of that cultural assimilation, when minority groups take on the identity of that dominant group. We've talked about assimilation before, especially when it came to the way of how Native Americans were handled. But assimilation is melting that tries to make everything look and behave the same. So does our society all have unified behavior and norms that is American identity? Now, there's going to be an Americanization movement that starts with those who believe in the idea of the melting pot, those who believe that these immigrants shall adopt this new form of identity. Volunteer institutes known as settlement houses are known for this Americanization program, as they would help newcomers learn English and to adopt American dress, diet, language, and culture. Then, once again, there's the salad bowl theory. The salad bowl theory being the idea of that cultural pluralism, when minority groups hold on to their own unique values, behaviors, and beliefs, and live within the foundation of what is American society. Each ingredient in the salad bowl is unique, but they are all combined to make one identity. By 1890, many cities had huge immigration problems. In San Francisco and Chicago, immigrants made up more than 40% of the population. 4 out of 5 immigrants of New York City were foreign-born or had foreign-born parents. While exclusionist programs forced some people to live in the ghettos, these neighborhoods also provided familiarity. Specialty shops, groceries, clothing stores provided a taste of food and culture that immigrants had not seen before. Like you can see from my images here, that's that idea of the ethnic enclaves, the idea of these subgroups that exist in these tight-knit cultures that were familiar to these foreign-born immigrants, like you see in the images on the top right-hand side. So when we look at America, which one do you see? That is the great question that we have when we do this assignment. Accepting immigrants into American society was not always easy, and that's definitely going to be true for the experiences of these new immigrants. Newcomers often face nativism, which was the tendency towards preferring native-born white Americans over these new immigrants. The idea of the original Protestant old immigrants being the more true Americans instead of these new foreigners who are trying to adopt it. During the economic recessions of the late 19th century, competition for jobs and houses started feeling a lot of resentment, especially with the limitations within the cities. Many native-born workers worried that immigrants would work for lower pay, which would bring down the wages for all the workers. And this started lots of resentment for these new immigrants coming in. This also then turns into legislation, as there's going to be policies to restrict some immigration. Some of this nativism starts to turn into legislation. And one example of this is going to be the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Extreme hostility towards Chinese labor had led to Congress to pass this act, which prohibited immigration of more Chinese laborers coming in. It also limited the civil rights of the Chinese immigrants who were currently here, and it forbade naturalization of Chinese residents, meaning that if you were a Chinese immigrant who was now an American citizen and you now had a child, your child is not considered an American citizen with naturalization taken away. This was a way of trying to limit or put a quota on certain groups of people in America, as there was a fear that this was tainting American identity, as there was new faces that would represent it that don't look like what we would consider the typical immigration of those old immigrants. This act had unintended negative consequences on the economy, especially in the state of California that relied on that cheap Chinese labor for both industry and for railroading. These acts marked the beginning of legislation restricting immigration in the United States. So with what you've heard today in today's lesson, what is it that you see for these immigrants? Is it the melting pot, or is it the idea of a salad bowl? And when you even reflect on the society that you're in today, what do you see now? Has it been more of the melting pot, or have we still held on to those individual cultural values and identities within the foundation of American society? Answer this question before you can continue. Perfect. Thank you so much. Now, as we conclude today's lesson, I really want you guys to understand the journey that a lot of these immigrants had to take to really come into America, as depending on who you are and how much money you had, your experience was vastly different. This video is going to really capture that. Please watch this before we finish up today's lesson. Thank you. And now that you've seen this video that captures it, what was the process like for immigrants entering into America? Go ahead and do this checkpoint now that you've seen how that journey looked for immigrants coming from Europe into America. Well done. Thank you so much. And congratulations, folks. We just finished another episode of History Talks. I hope that you guys understood a little bit more about immigration within the Industrial Revolution and the differences that we see with our newcomers and the experiences they have when coming into America. Now that we've seen all of these different people come into our cities, we're going to see what those living and working experiences must be like within this new industrialized world. But for today, this is it for me, folks. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Mr. Martinez, and I'm signing out. Thank you so much, and have a great day.